here at the terminal. I'm interviewing Mr. Phil Smith, who is an author. His latest book is The Poor Will Be Glad. He writes about the effects of microfinance lending institutions around the world and how Christians can become more knowledgeable and more effective in this medium of giving. Could you explain to us the differences between economies in the developing world as opposed to the third world?
Sure. In the developed world, of course, like the United States, we have a highly developed infrastructure. We have highways, electricity, water that's clean, and we also have a highly complex financial system. We have banks everywhere, and even if you're poor and you can't do a bank, you have payday lending, pawn shops. There's a lot of ways you can get financing. And the difference between the way poor people live in the United States and rich people live in the United States is really not very much. Because the poor people have access, they typically have electricity, clean water, on and on. They have plenty to eat because we have social safety nets in place. When you leave the developed world and go to the developing world, what you find out is almost none of those assumptions are true. Poor people seldom have access to electricity, seldom have access to clean water, medical attention, they don't have good communication, they don't have good transportation, on and on. But one of the main things they lack is a complex infrastructure for financing. The other difference, so that sets the stage for what it's like to live. They also don't have social safety nets. So if some poor person can't feed themselves, they starve and die. That's why there's not a lot of really incapable poor people. Because if you're incapable, you're probably dead. And so they don't last very long. The other side of that is that in the developed world, almost all of us have jobs. We work for a company, we work for a university, a nonprofit, where in the developing world, almost everybody's self-employed. There are very few jobs, and the jobs that are available go to a few men. So almost everybody is self-employed. So there's a huge difference in the way people live in the developing world compared to the developed world.
And in that, when you say safety net, here we have Social Security, we have welfare, we have even soup kitchens,
food stamps, unemployment, on and on.
So it's important for our listeners and viewers to know that when you say safety net, here in the U.S. we have all of these options that, if you lose your home, you can go to a homeless shelter. But if you're in a third world nation like Haiti or the Dominican Republic, you lose your home, you are out in the cold.
That's right. I was just in India, and it was amazing driving on the train how often you look out and there's people sleeping on the ground. They don't have home, and there's nowhere for them to go.
Man. So, having explained to you how the economic system works in a developed country as opposed to a third world country, why is microfinance lending, well, first, what is it, and then why is it so important?
Well, microfinance lending is simply making small loans to poor people. And the size of the loan is, let's say, 1/4 to 1/3 of the national average income. So in a poor country in Africa, the national income might be $200 a year. So the size of a loan might be $50. As opposed to America, where average income is $42,000 or so now. So a typical loan here, in contrast, would be over $10,000.
So it definitely goes much further.
That's right.
A loan will go much further in a third world nation as opposed to here in the U.S.
That's right. I can make 200 loans in some poor country in Africa for one loan in the United States. So if I want to have greater impact for more people, where I would want to go is to the poorer countries.
And so what would be the benefits, having explained what microfinance lending is, what would you say are the benefits of a church getting involved with a microfinance lending institution?
Well, let's talk about what poor people do with the loan is they have to use it in their job to increase their income.
Okay.
That's simply what it's for.
Right.
If they use it for personal consumption, they're worse off than they were before, because now they've used it up and they don't have a way to repay the loan.
Right.
So the whole purpose of the microloan is to allow the person to either grow their business or to start a business.
Okay.
So why would a church want to be involved in microfinance? First of
Right.
all, well, it's a good way to help people become non-dependent, to improve their lives. Children are better off when their mothers take care of them than when somebody else takes care of them.
Right.
When they can feed themselves, they're better off than if somebody feeds them. So if a church wants to become involved in an activity where they can help people on a sustained basis, where people don't become dependent, then it's a very good thing to do. And I especially like it where churches want to team that concept with sharing the gospel.
Right.
When they have that concept involved, then they'll get involved with local churches. They'll look at the problem as a long-term solution where they're willing to spend the time and the resources to really change people's lives, as opposed to just going in, doing something very short-term and coming back out.
Right. And maybe this would be a good time to explore those differences, because I think most people would agree the historical or traditional church model is, let's pull a lot of resources together, go to another nation, give them all away, and we've done a great work. And I think that microfinance, many would consider it relatively new, since Mr. Eunice, he experimented with it for years, as you're well aware, and then in 2006 won the Nobel Peace Prize for it. Why can you explore the differences between just traditional giving and microfinance lending?
Well, I'll even take it back a step further.
Okay.
If you go back, let's say 200 years, when Americans started sending missionaries overseas, generally the missionaries were sent not to give away stuff. They were there to share the gospel, to get involved in the community, and to stay a long time.
Okay.
One of my best friends was a missionary that lived in Thailand for 60 years.
Wow.
He lived there from when he was 20 till he was 80 years old.
Wow.
And so that was the thought process. You got involved in people's lives, and you modeled the life of Jesus. And over a period of time, people would hopefully be attracted to that and change their ways. And that's why the older term missionaries had such a benefit. In the U.S., though, somewhere in the 1900s, we all became enamored with the thought of, we can give stuff to poor people and it'll help them.
Okay.
So we started changing our mission efforts to where we would send carloads of clothes or money, whatever we would, to poor people. And we started becoming involved in short-term mission projects.
Okay.
We send tens of thousands of people. They go somewhere in the world for 2 weeks and come back and feel really good about what they did. The odds that they have any long-term impact on these people is pretty thin.
Okay.
Right. It probably helps them and gets them more involved, which is important. But to think that you're going to change somebody's life in a couple of weeks is pretty absurd.
Right.
And so what I think is happening now throughout Christendom, people are beginning to get an idea that the money that they have often taken over has created dependency.
Right.
It has actually destroyed economies instead of helping economies. And people are taking a much bigger picture and a longer term view of this, and understanding, in my words, that it's the idea of how do you help people transform their lives and especially become disciples instead of making them dependent, and even though they may have given lip service to becoming a Christian, they need more instruction than that. They need a long model to be able to see.
I know in your book you describe different situations are described where some microfinance lending institutions will give to only Christians, and so that creates the problem of, well, of course I'm a Christian, give me a loan.
I think that situation for the microfinance institutions, didn't happen for very long. It happened
Right.
early in the situation. They very quickly saw they were creating what were originally called rice Christians, where in Asia, Christians would go over, and as long as you were a Christian and you came to church, they would give you food, but when the food stops, the people quit coming.
Right.
And so they didn't want to create that. There's very few MFIs anymore, microfinance institutions, who take that into account. And the better ones actually use it for an evangelistic tool.
Okay.
They would just as soon give a microloan to somebody who's not a Christian, because that gives them an opportunity for their loan officers to be in contact with them, invite them to church, and so on. So I think the better, the Christian-oriented microfinance institutions think of how do you use microfinance as an evangelistic tool, as well as a way to help people.
So if a church was interested in, we'll use the word partnering with a microfinance lending institution, what would be the best way for them to go about finding a good, reputable lending institution that's worthy of their funds?
Okay. There's probably two criteria that they should think of.
Okay.
One is, do they want to help a specific community?
Okay.
And if they want to help a specific community, then the best way is to try to find a microfinance institution that works near that community already, or in that community, and deal with them. Often that microfinance institution won't be Christian. So you would deal with them like you would the Red Cross. It's a good institution. If you find out that it's reputable and so on, you deal with them, because the idea is a microfinance institution is just like a bank. Right? So we don't normally ask banks whether they're Christian or not.
Right.
So what you're interested in is how do you use the funding from the banks.
Right.
So I know of several instances where churches find a microfinance institution near where they're already working. They fund a branch bank in that community, and then that allows their people to have access to financing. Not only the people that go to their churches, but people in the community. So the idea is, how do you bring the whole community into the situation, not just a few members? Another way to do it, though, is to partner with a microfinance institution that is Christian. But their idea is, how do we use our loan officers as evangelical spreaders of the word? That's not very good grammar. But how do you use your loan officers?
Yes.
Because they have access to people in the markets that the preachers may not have. And frankly, in many countries, the people are not evangelical at all. I think of places like Russia. The people just aren't. The normal Christian is happy to be a Christian, but they're not interested in sharing their faith. So, and that extends many times to the preachers. So a good way to help them is to have a microfinance group who is interested in doing that. Because their people will actually go out and share the word and invite people to church and so on. In that case, what you're looking for is a very good Christian microfinance institution. Unfortunately, there's not very many of them. There's very few. And that's an issue. Christians have not generally found microfinance to be something that they want to jump on and support.
Now, why do you think that is?
We have been trained to give away stuff to people. We have been trained to think that the most important thing is just to share the verbal word. So we spend a huge amount of resources sending people, sometimes full-time missionaries, sometimes short-term, to share the gospel, and that's all they do. Or we're trained to just take carloads of stuff somewhere and give it away. So we kind of do one or the other, where microfinance is a way where you can bring it in on a long-term basis, and we're not thinking that way most of the time.
Business is mission, yes.
And I apologize for thinking about that. It's a way where you set your business up, where the idea is to have a really good business, but also provide a Christian environment. And so in those sorts of situations, the people are with you 7 to 10 hours a day at work.
Wow,
Where if you're
okay.
at church, you're there an hour a week.
Okay.
So you get 40 more times exposure
Uh-huh.
in a job than
Right.
you do in there. So it's the same thing here in America, where when people are working in a Christian
Mm-hmm.
environment, it's much more likely they will be attracted to Christianity. If the Christians themselves are attractive.
Yeah.
So that's why. In microfinance, they actually get a lot more exposure than they might in church too, because you have weekly meetings
Right.
where the people have to come, and in that environment, you're around people that are Christians, and they want to share the word with you, and if you want to be exposed to it, you can. So it's microfinance institutions don't have the same hours that Business Missions does,
Right.
but it has a whole different scope. You're trying to do
Okay.
something different. Business Missions actually is a way to provide employment for people,
Right.
but you can't do very many people.
Okay.
It's unlikely you're going to start a business that you employ more than a few people.
Right.
Whereas if you're doing microfinance, you might be providing loans to thousands or tens of thousands of people. So you have a different spread that you're
Okay.
trying to deal with.
Okay. Let me ask this question. How important is it for the Christian missional, Christian missiology, how important is that? How important is it for that to change? With the idea of going from the traditional rice Christians, we're just giving things away and people are Christian in name as long as they can receive the benefits, as opposed to let's do maybe a business's missions, let's do microfinance lending. How important is that model?
I'm a business guy,
Right.
as you know. My idea is always to look to see how effective I am already, and if I'm really effective, I'm not going to change what I'm doing.
Right.
Don't fix it if it ain't broke, is
Right.
the saying in Oklahoma. I think if most churches looked at what they do in their foreign missions, they would say it's broken.
Okay.
And if they went to measure how effective they are on changing people's lives, and I don't want to use modern terminology, I have to say, if they're effective in making disciples, then they should do what they're doing. But if you look across the wide swath
Right.
of Christianity in America, there are very, very few programs that are effective in making disciples.
Okay.
And so what I would say is, if you're interested in making disciples, rethink what you're doing and do what it takes to make disciples.
Okay.
And in my view, that generally is a combination of you share the gospel, you have to have long-term teaching, you have to model what it looks like to be a Christian, because these people don't know what
Right.
it looks like.
Yeah.
Many times they don't know what that is. And then you have to meet physical needs so they're not prohibited from coming in
Okay.
a sense. So when you can provide that environment, then you have a chance to make disciples. And sometimes it means you don't do it by yourself. You find a way to partner. You partner with an MFI. You
Okay.
partner with an organization, maybe Navigators. I don't know who it is,
Right.
but it's rather interesting for me to think that most businesses are willing to partner with other businesses to become effective because
Right.
they know they don't have the skills, where churches are very loath to partner with other Christian organizations, which is, rather interesting that
Yes.
we are not willing to do that. But I think it is the issue of I don't really think most churches are interested in making disciples.
Okay.
That's not where they end up.
Okay.
They're interested in making converts. They're
Yes.
interested in raising money. They're interested in helping people. They're interested in a lot of things. And overall, if you add up all their programs, they may get it done. But the way it happens,
Right.
they may accomplish their purposes, but making disciples is seldom one of those purposes.
Why do you think that is?
I've actually spent a lot of time thinking about that, because that's the crux of, to me, that's the crux of the matter, both from our churches, but it's also for me personally.
Okay.
And the reason there are many reasons. One is people are naturally inclined to share the gospel or help people.
Okay.
So their natural inclination is that way. People tend to be around people like themselves, so you tend to be on committees with people that are like you. The other reason is it's much easier to raise money if you're at one end of the spectrum or the other.
Okay.
It's relatively simple to raise money. If I can share the gospel with people for 50 cents a person, I can probably raise a lot of money.
Right.
But if it's taken me $10,000 to make one disciple, that's a lot harder to raise money for, because people's mindset in America doesn't go that way. We don't consider that efficient, and so I think what it is, it's a redirection of what we're trying to accomplish. If we understood the New Testament to say our mission is making disciples, which theoretically I think we agree with that.
Right.
If that was the way you measured it, then the fact that you preached the gospel to 1 million people and never made a disciple, you would say that's incredibly ineffective. I won't do that anymore. I will redirect my resources. But if you have a cell right now, you go into a congregation and say, look, it takes 7 years in Thailand to make a disciple. 7 years. It takes a lot of money. If that's what you want to do, this is what it takes. Most of us are saying, I don't want to do that. That's too much.
That's too much money.
Too much resources.
Time intensive.
And we're not willing to dedicate that much resource.
Okay.
And so we define away what we should be trying to accomplish from the very start.
Okay. That's crazy stuff, isn't it?
It's very interesting, I think, because I've been on the other side. That's why it affects me. I've been on mission boards where in the past I've looked at it and I've said, okay, we shouldn't support that person because they didn't make enough converts, or they didn't do enough this or enough that.
Right.
And I never stopped to think that wasn't what we were trying to do. It was, and now I have some friends in Honduras. It's a couple who nursing backgrounds, and they make a few disciples every year.
Okay.
And it takes them a long time, and it's an intensive deal. And they use all their medical skills, everything, to get people involved. I have now believed they're the most effective people I know in the mission field.
Yeah.
Whereas a few years ago, I would have defined them a way to say, a couple of disciples a year, that doesn't work.
Yeah, it's not a crusade, it's not flashy, it's not glamorous.
Sure.
Wow, okay. So if a church is interested in microfinance lending, giving to a microfinance institution, where should they look? Because as you said, there's not many Christian MFIs out there.
Right.
So where should they look?
Again, depending on what they're trying to accomplish, if they just want to help people be influenced to Christ through microfinance, some of the good institutions, Hope International in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, is excellent. Esperanza in the Dominican Republic is really good. There's 2 or 3 like that. There's not very many.
Okay.
That's the shame of it.
Okay.
If you want to help your community, again, you find somebody who's reputable in that community. We have a church here in Tulsa that raises money, and every time they can raise about $15,000, they give it to an organization called Finca, and just says, go start a microfinance branch bank in a village somewhere. Up to you. We just want to help people. Now, they help people, but there's no influence for God in the way they do it.
In chapter 14 of your book, entitled God's Business, you write about a new definition of retirement. And I absolutely dig this chapter, really enjoyed it. Can you tell our listeners and viewers about this chapter?
The crux of the matter is retirement in America has long been considered a right. When I get 65 years old, I get to shut it down. I'm going to go fish. I'm going to play golf. And I'm going to do all those things that I always wanted to do and didn't have time. That's a failed model.
Okay.
I think people have figured that out, that most people who retire that way are unhappy and they're unfulfilled, and for a variety of reasons. And so that model really doesn't work. And it's certainly not a biblical model. If you go into the Bible, the only instance it appears of retirement is some of the priests were able to retire, but it's primarily because they couldn't physically do their duties.
Right.
It didn't mean they quit working for God, it just
Right.
meant they couldn't physically do what they'd been doing. So it doesn't appear to me that the Bible really talks about,
This
you get to this
concept.
deal and you're through.
Yeah.
It may be that you have to change what you're doing, but the idea is we're supposed to work on behalf of God's kingdom until we go there. And
Right.
so, to me, retirement is how do you take the skills that you've learned in business and refocus those skills so that you can grow God's kingdom, so that a banker could use banking skills, the car mechanic can use car mechanic skills. Whatever those skills are, you can use those skills after you retire for the kingdom. And that's an interesting way to look at it. And the people who do that are the happiest people I know. I study retirement quite a bit because I
Okay.
teach it.
Okay.
And the only really happy people I know that are retired are not rich in terms of finances. They are the ones who continue to find a way to use their skills for God's kingdom.
Okay, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Mr. Smith, do you have any last thoughts that maybe we didn't cover while we were speaking?
I think it's keep your mind open
Okay.
for ways to grow God's kingdom.
Okay.
If what you've been doing isn't working, recognize it and
Okay.
change.
Okay.
And whether that's here in America or whether it's overseas,
Okay.
and whether it's personally or for your church,
Yeah.
find out what's working and do it that way. And it's a lot more fun when you do,
Yeah.
and a lot
Awesome.
more effective too. So,
Awesome. Thank you so much.
thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Again, the name of the book is The Poor Will Be Glad. It's co-authored with Peter Greer. It's published by Zondervan. You can pick it up in your local Christian bookstore. I'm sure Amazon.com or
Yes.
Barnes & Noble as well.